2017 was a huge year in pop culture. In the world of film, Star Wars Episode 8 would hit theaters. In music, Ed Sheeran was topping the charts with Shape of You. Meanwhile, in the WWE, Roman Reigns was still trying to get over as the next face of the company. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into the entire story from start to finish in the WWE in 2017, a year in review. When we last left off, AJ Styles was riding high as the WWE Champion on SmackDown, and Kevin Owens was not only the Universal Champion on Raw, but was also in the midst of an all-time great storyline with Chris Jericho. And that would normally lead us into the first big main roster show of the year, but this year, instead, there was a couple of things to come first, as on January 14th and 15th, WWE crowned their first ever United Kingdom Champion in a tournament which included the likes of Jordan Devlin, Trent Seven, and Pete Dunne, but which was eventually won by Tyler Bate. Then after that, NXT held TakeOver San Antonio on January 28th, another blow-away show for the developmental brand, which saw the Authors of Pain win the tag team titles from DIY, Asuka retain her women's title in a fatal four-way match against Nikki Cross, Billie Kay, and Peyton Royce, and Bobby Roode become the new NXT World Champion after dethroning Shinsuke Nakamura in the main event. So with big shoes to fill, then the main roster went all in the following evening when they held the Royal Rumble, and there gave fans a card which not only saw Kevin Owens and Charlotte Flair both retain their Universal and Raw women's belts respectively, but also John Cena have an all-time great moment when he would win his 16th world title after defeating AJ Styles, with him now tied with Ric Flair in the record books. But for as big of a moment as that was, it wasn't the main focus of the show once it was over, because in the Rumble match itself, lots of storyline progression took place when Goldberg eliminated Brock Lesnar, embarrassing him for the second time in the process, and Roman Reigns eliminated The Undertaker to set up their own WrestleMania showdown. Still, it wouldn't be the big dog who won the bout, because he was eventually thrown over the top rope by overall victor and newest Wyatt family recruit, Randy Orton. So with the Viper now booking himself a shot at the WWE title at the Showcase of the Immortals, the only question left was who would he be facing? Sure, John Cena was the champion heading out of the Rumble, but he'd still have to defend this title once more at February 12th's Elimination Chamber. Of course, he wouldn't be the only one set to defend a belt there though, because on the undercard of the Blue Brand exclusive show, while American Alpha were keeping hold of their tag team titles after a war against the Ascension, Alexa Bliss was losing her SmackDown women's title to Naomi. That said, the big story was all on the main event where, inside the titular chamber, Big Match John put the WWE title on the line against AJ Styles, Dean Ambrose, The Miz, Baron Corbin, and the man who had come out of the evening the new top dog on the show, Bray Wyatt. Yes, after a run of ups and downs, the Eater of Worlds had finally won the gold. But with Randy Orton being the Royal Rumble winner, this meant a crack had now formed within the Wyatt family. Before we'd find out the next stage of that angle though, another even bigger moment came when, after Chris Jericho got a little too excited during a confrontation between Kevin Owens and Goldberg on Raw a few weeks prior, he'd make the challenge on his best friend's behalf for a Universal title match to take place at the big show. So realizing he'd gone too far then, Y2J hosted one of the greatest segments of all time when on February 14th he gave us the Festival of Friendship. Unfortunately though, for as great as this was at showing the epic bromance between the two Canadians, it all ended in tragedy when KO added Jericho to his own list and then laid him out as revenge for the match he'd volunteered him for. But even if this made the champ feel a little better, he'd still have to face off against Goldberg at March 5th's Raw exclusive show Fastlane. And there, predictably, after trying to dodge the former WCW star for as long as possible, he'd end up losing his prized Universal title to him. Of course, this wasn't the only big moment which took place here though, because elsewhere on the card, Samoa Joe made a convincing first impression on the main roster with a win over Sami Zayn, and after having dethroned Charlotte Flair for the Raw Women's title a few weeks prior, Bayley successfully defended against the Queen on pay-per-view. That said, this wouldn't be the last time the two were on opposite sides of the ring from each other, because at WrestleMania 33 on April 2nd, they'd both be part of a fatal four-way match. Before we'd get there though, the newest Hall of Fame class saw inductions for the likes of Kurt Angle, Diamond Dallas Page, and Rick Rude. Then after that, NXT held another banger when at TakeOver Orlando on April 1st, Aleister Black got the better of Andrade Cien Almas, Asuka fended off the challenge of Ember Moon, and Bobby Roode successfully defended his NXT World Championship against Shinsuke Nakamura. And just 24 hours later, the showcase of the Immortals arrived once more too when, in front of a packed Florida crowd, the night started out with AJ Styles beating Shane McMahon, Bayley successfully defending her Raw Women's title against Charlotte Flair, Sasha Banks and Nia Jax, and Kevin Owens defeat Chris Jericho. And after that, the Hardy Boys made their triumphant return to WWE by winning the Raw Tag Team titles. John Cena proposed to Nikki Bella after they defeated The Miz and Maurice, and Seth Rollins finally got his revenge over Triple H by pinning him in the middle of the ring. Then in the main events, Brock Lesnar and Goldberg ended their program with maybe the best 5-minute match ever. Randy Orton returned to the side of the good guys to end the brief WWE title reign of Bray Wyatt, and in the last bout of the evening, The Undertaker lost to Roman Reigns. Yes, despite fan backlash, it was clear that WWE were now all in on Roman as a top guy again. And this would only be further proven at April 30th's Payback pay-per-view, as there, in the main event of the Raw exclusive show, the Big Dog faced off against Braun Strowman. Elsewhere, meanwhile, this show saw Chris Jericho get his win back over Kevin Owens, the newly drafted Alexa Bliss win the Red Brand's women's title from Bayley, and Bray Wyatt take on Randy Orton in a House of Horrors match. Meanwhile, over on NXT, just a few weeks later, they'd hold TakeOver Chicago, a show which featured Pete Dunne winning the United Kingdom title from Tyler Bate, Bobby Roode dispatching another challenger in the form of Hideo Itami, and DIY finally exploding when, following a loss to the Authors of Pain, Tommaso Ciampa turned on his partner Johnny Gargano and kicked off possibly the greatest storyline in Black and Gold brand history. And back over on the main roster, the next night SmackDown held Backlash with the card made up of Kevin Owens and AJ Styles, the final collapse of the Wyatt family when Luke Harper defeated Eric Rowan, and the most shocking world title change in modern history when Jinder Mahal defeated Randy Orton to win the top prize. Yes, after spending his entire career as a lower card jobber, Jinder was now the champ, and with Universal title holder Brock Lesnar being AWOL, this made him the de facto best in the company. Meanwhile, over on the Raw brand, we saw June 4th's Extreme Rules, a show which saw The Miz win the Intercontinental title from Dean Ambrose, The Bar become Raw Tag Team Champions after dethroning the Hardy Boys, and Bayley lose to Alexa Bliss in a kendo stick on a pole match. And after this, a Universal title match was set up when Samoa Joe beat Roman Reigns, Finn Balor, Seth Rollins, and Bray Wyatt to become #1 contender to Brock. Before that bout took place, however, SmackDown returned to pay-per-view on June 18th for Money in the Bank, where in the first ever women's version of the titular match, Carmella got the better of Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, Natalya, and Tamina, all with a little help from James Ellsworth, of course. And meanwhile, in the men's Money in the Bank match, Baron Corbin would come out on top. Then the rest of the card was filled out with Jinder Mahal retaining his WWE title against Randy Orton in the rematch between the two. After this came the Raw exclusive show on July 9th, Great Balls of Fire, where fans watched as Braun Strowman and Roman Reigns continued their feud in an ambulance match. The Miz retained his IC strap over Dean Ambrose, and Sasha Banks failed to win the Raw Women's title from Alexa Bliss. Also, The Bar had a great Iron Man bout with the Hardy Boys, and Samoa Joe proved he was worthy of the main event spot during an awesome bout between him and Brock Lesnar. But for as great as he was here, the Samoan submission machine wasn't able to beat the champ, and so Lesnar's reign would continue on into the summer. Not that this was the last time the two met in the ring, of course. It was just that the next time they did, there would be other bodies in play too. Before we look at this, however, we have to shift back over to SmackDown, as on July 23rd they held Battleground, and there, in front of a rabid Philadelphia crowd, John Cena and Rusev rekindled their feud with a flag match, all while elsewhere, Natalya was becoming #1 contender to Naomi's SmackDown Women's title, Shinsuke Nakamura was picking up a win over Baron Corbin, and Jinder Mahal was once again defeating Randy Orton, this time in a Punjabi prison bout. Then, once that was over, it was full steam ahead to SummerSlam weekend as things kicked off on August 19th with TakeOver Brooklyn 3, a show which saw Tommaso Ciampa watch on from the injury shelf as Johnny Gargano fell further into a pit of despair with a loss to Andrade Cien Almas. But that wasn't all which was happening on this show, because elsewhere, Sanity became the new tag team champions after defeating the Authors of Pain, Asuka retained her women's title once more against Ember Moon, and Drew McIntyre made his triumphant return to WWE by winning the NXT World title from Bobby Roode. Yes, it was quite a moment, and one which left the main roster with another tough act to live up to. So it's just as well then that SummerSlam the following evening turned out to be a great show too. But what made this one worth watching? Well, for starters, there were the two women's title changes when Natalya and Sasha Banks won the SmackDown and Raw straps respectively. Then, as if that wasn't enough, the Shield sort of reunited when Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins partnered up to win the Raw Tag Team titles from The Bar. Finn Balor reintroduced the Demon in order to get the win over Bray Wyatt, and Brock Lesnar won a very entertaining Fatal 4-Way match for the Universal title against Roman Reigns, Samoa Joe, and Braun Strowman. Of course, that wasn't the only men's world title on the line this night, though, because in the other main event, after dispatching of Baron Corbin and his failed Money in the Bank cash-in attempt just days prior, Jinder Mahal was able to beat Shinsuke Nakamura to retain the top prize over on the Blue brand. Yes, if you'd told fans a couple of years before this that Nakamura was going to fail in his attempts to beat Jinder Mahal for the WWE title, they probably never would have seen it coming. And they would have probably stared at you in complete disbelief if you'd also told them that, in order to earn this title shot, Nakamura had defeated John Cena in a dream match on an episode of SmackDown just a few weeks prior. But reality is often weird and unpredictable. Just ask Sasha Banks, because a mere 8 days after winning the Raw Women's title from Alexa Bliss, she'd drop it right back to the goddess on the August 28th episode of Raw, with this only continuing her unfortunate tradition of never being able to successfully defend a belt. Maybe she should have been taking notes from Shayna Baszler then, as on September 12th, she'd proved to be a dominating force when she beat Kairi Sane in the finals of the first ever Mae Young Classic, an all-women's tournament which featured a variety of talent from all over the world, such as Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm, Serena Deeb, Tessa Blanchard, and Bianca Belair, just to name a few. That said, Banks likely didn't have much time to watch this anyways, as she instead had to focus on her rematch at September 24th's No Mercy, where on the orders of Raw general manager Kurt Angle, she, Bayley, Emma, and Nia Jax, and champ Alexa Bliss would all take part in a fatal 5-way match for the title. And that wasn't the only big moment coming out of this show, because after the goddess successfully retained, fans got to see Cesaro literally knock his teeth out during his and Sheamus's match against Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins. Brock Lesnar retained the Universal title against Braun Strowman, Enzo Amore become the Cruiserweight Champion after beating Neville, and in a bout which was WrestleMania main event worthy, John Cena attempted to pass the torch to new face of the company, Roman Reigns, in a moment which many fans still refused to get behind. But for as much as the crowd weren't getting into Roman still, at least they were getting into what Kevin Owens was doing over on SmackDown, as his one-man war on the McMahon family had seen him go so far as to headbutt Vince McMahon on live TV. And that led to the main event of October 8th's Hell in a Cell then, where, inside of the titular cage, KO faced off against Shane. And by the end, after saving his best friend from certain doom, Sami Zayn turned heel and reinvigorated his character. And he wasn't the only character being reinvigorated on this show. No, elsewhere 2 new champions were crowned when Baron Corbin defeated AJ Styles and Ty Dillinger to become the United States champion. And in a match of the year contender, the Usos beat the New Day inside of Hell in a Cell to take home the SmackDown Tag Team titles. Yes, new dawns were being forged everywhere on the Blue brand, and with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn now being united in their battle against authority figures Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan, it meant there was also a hot angle to see them through the rest of the year. So feeling the need to up their own game too then, Raw played their biggest card soon after this when the Shield was finally reunited. But as with all Shield reunions, this one turned out to be cursed because in the lead up to their match against Braun Strowman, The Miz, Kane, Cesaro, and Sheamus at October 22nd's TLC Tables, Ladders, and Chairs, Roman Reigns had to be pulled from competition due to him contracting the mumps. And he wasn't the only person who missed this show for the same reason. No, Bray Wyatt, someone who was supposed to face off against Finn Balor in a Demon vs. Sister Abigail match, also contracted the mumps prior to the show, and so had to be replaced by AJ Styles instead. Of course, this was a blessing in disguise when it came to the latter example though, as we all got to see a dream showing between the first 2 leaders of the Bullet Club. And in terms of the multi-man main event, well, there was also a great substitute there, because in Roman's absence, Kurt Angle came out of retirement and wrestled in a WWE ring for the first time in 11 years. Elsewhere, meanwhile, the rest of the card would see new Raw call-up Asuka make short work of Emma, and Jason Jordan, someone who had only just been revealed as the secret son of the Olympic hero, get a win over Elias to help establish himself as a single star going forward. Yes, now a Red Brand act full-time, Jordan was going to have to get used to being separated from his American Alpha partner Chad Gable, especially as in November, there would be no room for civil communication between the shows. No, this month, it was all about brand warfare, as November 19th Survivor Series pitted Raw and SmackDown against each other in a series of bouts to see which one was better. Meanwhile, over on NXT, they had a pretty big show the night before when at TakeOver War Games, the Dusty Rhodes created Classic Bout was brought in for the first time in a Vince McMahon-owned ring as a three-way situation saw Sanity take on the Authors of Pain and the newly formed Undisputed Era. And it was in this match that the UE reached their final form, as while going in, they were only made up of Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly, and former three-time Ring of Honor World Champion Adam Cole. By the end, Roderick Strong would switch his allegiances to them as well, as he helped the now four-man group secure the victory. But that wasn't the only big news coming out of this show, as in the undercard, Ember Moon defeated Kairi Sane, Nikki Cross, and Peyton Royce to win the NXT Women's title that Asuka vacated due to injury, all before moving up to the main roster. Then, as if that wasn't enough, not only did Aleister Black take on the Velveteen Dream in a big-time grudge match, but Andrade Cien Almas, with a little help from his managers Lena Vega, dethroned Drew McIntyre to win the NXT World title. Yes, at this time, it looked like Andrade had huge potential to be a main event player in WWE. Needless to say then, Survivor Series the following night had big shoes to fill, and in order to fill them, Vince McMahon decided to make some last-minute changes to the card when on the SmackDown before, AJ Styles beat Jinder Mahal to become a two-time WWE champion. Why was this done so abruptly? Well, as the pay-per-view was pitting the brand's champions against each other, it now meant that instead of seeing Brock Lesnar versus Jinder, we'd get to see the dream match of the Beast versus the Phenomenal One. And this certainly lived up to expectations as the two tore the house down for the 15 minutes they had, with it blowing away everything else on the card. Not that there wasn't anything else worth watching here though, as aside from the World Champions showdown, The Shield faced off against the New Day, the Usos took on the Bar in a Tag Team Champions versus Tag Team Champions match, and Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair battled it out to see who was the top women's champion in WWE. But all this really earned, or the victors in the end, were bragging rights because, with the two shows being separated again in December, there wasn't much storyline advancement to be found here. No, for that, we'd have to wait until the final big show of the year, December 17th's Clash of Champions, as there, not long after both a tribute to the Troops show and a special Starrcade-like event took place, SmackDown closed out the year by having AJ Styles defeat Jinder Mahal in the rematch between the two. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn continue to be a thorn in their boss's side when they picked up a win over Randy Orton and Shinsuke Nakamura. And Dolph Ziggler won the United States Championship by beating Baron Corbin and the now called-up Bobby Roode in a triple threat match. Not that this reign would last for long, however, as just days later, Ziggler came out on TV to relinquish the belt and apparently quit WWE altogether. Why was this? Well, that was never really made clear, and the fact he'd be back in a month's time with no further explanation didn't really help to make it any more understandable. But as that happened in January, we guess it's a story to be talked about in more detail another day, because when it comes to 2017, this marked the end of the line. And it certainly had been an interesting year, one where, with the brand extension now firmly established, people like Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and AJ Styles were all getting more opportunities than they likely would have otherwise.